The Srebrenica Genocide Memorial is known as the Srebrenica Potočari Memorial and Cemetery for the victims of the genocide. The Srebrenica genocide was the ethnic cleansing of Bosnian Muslims. It was perpetrated by the Bosnian Serb army under the command of Ratko Mladic in 1995. Till this day, bodies of victims are still being discovered. Serb soldiers were instructed to initially bury their victims in mass graves, but later ordered to dig up and scatter their bones in other areas to hide the genocide. When Muslim Bosnians required to know where their loved ones were buried, this information was and is still kept from them. Let us look at the process of how the deceased victims are identified, reunited with their families and then buried. They say there are 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. Every time a woman thinks she has buried the remains of her husband or her son, another piece of him resurfaces, and she is forced to relive the pain and sadness all over again. Matching DNA from blood and bone samples has become the only accurate way to identify Bosniak bodies recovered from grave sites. The International Commission of Missing Persons has taken over 71,000 blood samples from the families of the missing. So far, 91 mass grave sites have been uncovered in Srebrenica alone. Sometimes the remains of one man have been found in 4 different grave sites, 50 kilometers apart. Remains are not only found in grave sites, but on surface sites such as caves and rivers. 520 victims were identified last year alone. The ICMP currently operates the world's largest DNA human identification facility. However, the process of identification has not been easy. The families are also victims of the crime. They have to be sure that their genetic data will be protected, not shared, and will only be used for the purposes of identification. Ethnic tensions are still rife in Bosnia. Till this day, Muslims are discriminated against and hated. Thus, some families are wary of providing a blood sample which reveals the identity to a Bosnian, Croat or Serb. There is fear that their sample may be polluted to prevent a positive match. This is being tackled directly by the ICMP through a bar-coded system which conceals the identity of the sample. There is a facility housed in a large sports centre in Tuzla where all the blood samples are collected. Requests are sent out all over the world to relatives of the missing person. Those who provide a blood sample are asked to fill in a form documenting their kinship to the deceased. A spot of the blood sample is placed on chemically treated paper which protects the DNA. Each blood sample is given a unique barcode correlating with family details. Samples are sent off to a lab in Sarajevo and cross-referenced with profiles in a database to determine a match. The procedure is lengthy and costly. The operation costs approximately 5 million annually. This includes cost of running the DNA labs and teams sent out on excavations to recover bodies. Archaeologists are sent out to mass grave sites to ensure any mortal remains found are handled with care. Any bone recovered is sent to a lab in Banja Luka for analysis and then sent to Sarajevo for DNA testing. Once that process is complete, the results are sent to Tuzla to determine a match. To hide remains, the Bosnian Serb army issued an organised effort to dig up mass graves using heavy equipment. This reburial of graves was carried out during the night, with several grave sites in Srebrenica being dug up. Remains were moved to a secondary, sometimes tertiary site. Thus, some grave sites have a mixture of partial remains, making the process of identification complex. Until then, the remains of victims are kept in large mortuaries in Sarajevo and Tuzla. Some families refuse to accept the results in the hope that their loved one is still living. They'll say, "Well, you only found an arm, that doesn't mean they're dead." For those who choose to bury their partial remains, if further remains are found, Bosnian authorities take responsibility for re-exhumation. Some families have waited years for a fragment of bone or lock of hair, something to show a memory of their loved ones. Some victims are yet to be reported missing. Entire families were massacred, lineages were wiped out. Others are not reported missing because there is no one living to file the report. To attain closure, families of the dead assemble on 11th July every year to commemorate loved ones at the Srebrenica Potočari Memorial Center. Last year, genocide survivor Mujo Music was finally able to bury his 26-year-old son. We escaped through the forest when Srebrenica fell. 8 people were killed, including my son. Another woman buried 4 bones of her deceased husband, for that is all that was found of him. Recently, an officer convicted at the International Criminal Tribunal was asked to estimate the number of Bosnian Serb soldiers who had committed war crimes. He answered 20,000. To date, out of those probable 20,000, only 500 have been convicted. For the families of the victims, justice is a distant hope. All they ask is to be reunited with the peace of their loved one so that they have a grave to grieve at. The ICNP is funded through voluntary grants, donations and contributions.